So this video is about fractions of an amount, and we're going to do these using bars, as bar modelling really helps you to understand what a fraction of an amount is. So our first question is 1/4 of 28, and for each of these questions I want you to draw out a bar, and this bar represents one whole. Now my question is asking for 1/4, so I need to divide my one whole into quarters. So I divide it up equally, and each of these parts of the bar represent 1/4. My denominator is 4, and I've divided it into 4 parts because the denominator tells me how many parts I've divided it into. I've now got 28, so I'm going to draw another bar underneath, and that bar represents the 28. And some people write their numbers in the bar, and sometimes people prefer to write them outside the bar. I don't actually mind, but that is 28. Now we want 1/4, which is just one part of that. So what this tells me by looking at the bar is my 28 needs to be divided by 4, because I have 4 parts, to find out what one part would be. So I'm going to do 28 divided by 4, and that equals 7. So 28 divided by 4 is 7, so 1/4 of 28 is 7, and that is my answer. So just recapping that for you, it's 1/4, so I draw a bar and I divide it into 4 parts because my denominator is 4. And each one of those pieces is 1/4. My bar underneath is worth 28, which is this value here, 28 and 28. And because I want 1/4 of 28, which is one of my 4 parts here, I divide my 28 by 4, and my answer for the question is 7. Right, I draw that out in your books. Make sure you've got the understanding of that. You can always re-listen before we move on to the next example. So our next example is 1/12 of 48. Now I want you to press pause in a moment, but first of all what I want you to do is draw out a bar. So you're going to, in a moment, draw me out a bar. We always start these questions by drawing that bar. How many pieces are you going to divide that bar into? Now if you can't remember, if you rewind, you'll remember what I said last time. So do go back, that's a good thing to do. How many pieces will I divide this bar into? Press pause, draw that bar out, have a go. So I have divided my bar into 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12 pieces. And the reason it's 12 is because my denominator is 12. So remember, your denominator, it tells you how many pieces you divided a whole into, and that's with any fraction. And therefore each one of these pieces is 1/12. I'm not quite going to manage, I feel, to fit them all on, but I'm going to have a go at writing them all the way along so that you can clearly see that these are dividing it each into 1/12, And there should be 12 of them, because remember 12 twelfths is 1 whole. So I now draw another bar underneath. I want you to press pause. I want you to draw that bar underneath. And what should that bar represent? Press pause, have a go. So hopefully you've had a draw of another bar now, and what I would expect to see is a bar all the way along, and this one is going to be 48 long. And my question asked me to find 1/12 of 48. So I actually just want to know how much one little piece is. Now I know my diagram's not perfect. I haven't got squared paper. If you have, yours might be really accurate, which is fantastic. But each of these pieces should be equal. You can see mine aren't quite. But each of these should be an equal amount, which means I've got 48 and I'm sharing it between 12, and sharing is dividing. So the calculation I need to do is 48 divided by 12. And some of you might be going, oh, God, that's quite challenging, but not if you write your 12 times table out. So always remember, you can do as much workings as you like. So we can always write out down the side what those times tables are. And look, that's me writing my 4 times table out. 1/12, 2, 3, 4. So 48 divided by 12 is 4. And that's what 1/12 of 48 is. 1/12 of 48 is 4, because it's the same as the 48 divided by the 12. Again, rewind that video, watch it again, make sure you understand it fully before we move on. So we're going to move on to our next example. Oh, this is a little bit different. Why is it different? Well, I've got a 3 here. My last example, my numerator was a 1, and previously my numerator was a 1, but now my numerator is a 3. But I can start exactly the same way. I start by drawing a bar. So let's draw a bar. My bar represents 1 whole. Now, I've always divided my bar up into pieces. What part of this fraction tells me how many pieces I should divide this by? And I have said this previously. So is it the numerator that tells me how many pieces to divide it by, or is it the denominator? What do you think? Well, the answer is it's the denominator that tells me how many pieces to divide it up into. So this is 1 whole. I need to divide it into 4 equal parts. And each part is worth 1/4. And then I draw a bar underneath. So let me draw that bar underneath. Can you remember how much that bar must be? How much has that bar got to be? Well, that bar represents the 20. And I'm going to write that in a different colour to help you see this. So I'm going to write that in green. There we go, it's 20, and that number there is 20. Now the thing is, I actually don't want to find 1/4. I want to find 3/4. So the 3 is going to tell me how many pieces I need to shade in. And I need to shade in 3 of these. Just notice I didn't label my last one. I think I better go back and do that. That should be a 1/4 up there. So if you notice now, each of these is worth 1/4, but because I want 3/4, I've shaded in 3 of them. Now, to start with, I still need to work out how much one of these little blocks within my bar is worth. So how do I work out how much is in there? So I'm going to draw an arrow. How much is 1/4? So how much is 1/4? Well, 1/4, I can work that out. That's 20 divided by 4, which is 5. So I now know that there is worth 5. I'm going to write that on to help me. That there is 5. So how do I work out what 3/4 are? Well, if 1/4 is 5, then the next one is 5, the next one is 5. I want 3 of those. So I can do 3 multiplied by 5 equals 15. And if you look, 3 is my numerator, and 3 can also be found here. But my diagram actually tells me what to do. So I have 20. First of all, I divide it by 4 to find what 1/4 is. And then because I have 3 of them shaded in, because I wanted 3/4, I multiply by 3. Now, there's quite a lot to understand there. Make sure you copy that out. And make sure you replay it again should you need to before you move on to the next example. So we're going to move on and look at the next one together. 2/5 of 40. Okay, I'd like you now to draw me out a bar, and I want you to show me what the bar would be divided into to start with, and just stop there and press play again. So draw me a bar. What are you going to divide that initial bar? And I'm going to draw you the initial bar. What's that going to be divided into? Once you've done that, press play. So my denominator is 5, so I'm going to divide this as best I can into 5 pieces. And each of these is 1/5. Now, if you manage to get that, that is absolutely brilliant. Well done. Now, the next thing is you're going to draw me another bar underneath. And what does that represent? Press pause, and when you've written down what that represents, press play again. Okay, so I'm hoping that you have written underneath 40. Now, have I finished? Is that all I need to do? Have I represented my question fully? Well, I'm going to say I haven't. I'm hoping that's what you were thinking. What else do I need to do? If you're not sure, I want you to still press pause. I want you to think, what haven't I done? Go back and look at the last question. The clue's there. There's something I haven't done that finishes this question off. I want you to have a go, press pause, press play when you've done it. So what you should have realised is we have not dealt with this number 2 on the top. because we've actually divided this into 1/5, and I haven't in any way shaded these in. I don't know how many parts I want. So we know that the numerator is 2, so I want 2/5. So that is what I do. Now I've got to think of the calculation. What's the first stage of the calculation? Press pause, write something down for that first stage. Off you go. Now, did you remember the first stage is that you need to find 1/5. You always start by finding 1/5. We've done that every time. So we started here. We found 1/4 to start with. Going back here, we found 1/12. Going back here, we find 1/4. We always find what's called the unit fraction first. So here we're going to find 1/5 to start with, and to do that, if you remember, it was 40 divided by 5, and that equals 8. Now if you got that right, brilliant, that's fantastic. Now press pause. What's the second part that you do? Okay, so for the second part, here you need to remember that we haven't got 1/5, we've got 2/5. So I now need to do 2 multiplied by 8, and I get my answer, which is 16. So 2/5 of 40 is 16. And I'm just going to draw your attention to something else here now. 40 is a whole, that's the whole amount, and 2/5 is less than a whole. My answer 16 is less than 40, which is correct. And you need to start thinking about, is my answer reasonable? Is that answer was more than 40, you would know it's wrong. And also, if you can start thinking, this here, I'm less than halfway along, because halfway would be in the middle. And 16 is less than half of 40. And this is that extra stage that really boosts your understanding, is looking at your answer. Is it reasonable? Is that likely to be the correct answer before you move on and do the next one? Right, the next question is 4/9 of 228. And this is a really large number here. Now, back here, we had to do 40 divided by 5. And we could have done that by writing out our 5 times table. Now here we're going to have to do a division with 288. And I would suggest that you're going to need the bus stop method for this. And if you remember, that's where we draw out this, which often gets called a bus stop in maths now. Now I'd like you to press pause. This is the challenge question, but I think you're up for that challenge. I want you to press pause, but I want you to start by drawing me a bar, because that's what you must do every time. I want you to draw a bar. I want you to make sure you draw 2 bars, one underneath each other. I want to see it divided up. I want to see it coloured in. And then I want to see your calculation. And when you've done all of that, you can press play. So quite a lot for you to do. So press pause now, press play when you're finished. So I'm hoping you've drawn this bar out so far, and 4/9 of 288 we would be shading in that. Now if you haven't got that far, I would suggest you press pause again now and you just review that bar, because this is the key part. So just reminding you, 9 parts I've divided it into because my denominator is 9. 4 parts I've coloured in because my numerator is 4 and because I have 4/9. And 288 is the total amount. Right, if you haven't got that far, you're going to stop, you're going to press pause, you're going to go back over that, and then you're going to try the calculation. If, however, you've completed all of it, or you know you've got that right, you carry on listening. So for the next stage, you're going to need to do 288 divided by 9. Why am I dividing it by 9? Because I always find 1/9 first. How much does one of these squares equal? That's what I start by doing. And this is where I'm going to need my bus stop division. So I'm going to do my bus stop division now. And I'm going to do 288 divided by 9, which I write like that. Now, if you're not great at your tables, that's not a problem. You just make sure you write those tables out every time you do a calculation. So down here, I'm going to write out my 9 times table. 9, 18, 27, 36. I write a few out to get me going. So 9s into 2 is 0. Carry my 2. 9s into 28. Well, if I look down here, I can go to 27, but I can't go to 36. So it would be 27 with 1 left over, and that would be 3 9s. So I can put a 3, but I know I've got 1 left over. And 9s into 18 is 2. So my answer for what is 1/9, 1/9 is 32. So that little square is worth 32. But I've got 4 of them. So I now need to do 4 multiplied by 32, and I think I'm going to do that. Some of you may use Chinese multiplication, which is brilliant. I'm going to do it this way. It's whichever way you really have that solid understanding of. So 4 multiplied by 2 is 8, and 4 multiplied by 3 is 12. So that's 128 is the answer. So that there is the answer to the original question, which is 4/9 of 288. I'm just going to do that last thing. It's got to be less than 288, is it? Oh. Yes, it is. But can you see where I've drawn that round it? I've made it a bit confusing, so I'm going to write it again underneath. Yes, it is 128. It definitely is less than the original number, so that's a good start. And actually, I would expect it to be less than half, which I look at it and it is less than half. So I think my answer's correct. If you manage to do that all on your own, big well done, because that's quite challenging and it's pulling in your skills of long division, multiplication as well. But remember, when you're doing all these questions for numbers, draw that bar because it so much helps you understand what the question's asking. Well done, thanks for listening, and go off and do lots of practicing.